Hi, I'm Ashley with Campbell. Thanks for investing your time to help your community be a great place to live. Before you watch the video, make sure to click the subscribe button so that we can help you make educated decisions as a board member.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us again today on another webinar. If you're returning and if this is your first time, welcome. My name is Evan Bradley. I'm one of the partners here at Campbell Property Management. For those of you who may not be familiar with Campbell, we've been in business since 1953 here in South Florida and exclusively manage condominium, HOA, and co-op associations throughout Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie counties, and now expanding up through the Treasure Coast and into Southeast Orlando. So if you are in any of those locations and you're looking for professional management, don't hesitate to reach out to us. As far as the size of Campbell, about 450 associations throughout that geographic range and around 1,200 full-time employees. So without further ado, we'll get into the HOA Committee Best Practices. Helping me today is Alexis Brownstein. Thank you, Alexis, for being on. Alexis is a HOA regional support person in Palm Beach County. She works with many of the largest HOAs in Palm Beach County and has for several years and understands how these committees work on a day-to-day level. Alexis, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Evan. I have been with Campbell for over 5 years. I've been in property management for a long time. So I've seen a lot of committees work, not work, and best practices is important to understand to function the best as possible. So happy to be here and share any knowledge that I can with our community.
Thanks, Alexis. So please don't hesitate to use the Q&A feature. We will be able to see any questions you type in there. We will not be able to answer if you raise your hand or any of those features, we will not be able to do that. So please do use the Q&A if you have questions. Just a reminder, this is not legal advice. This is not professional business advice. This is just education today. Neither one of us is an attorney, so if your questions are, is it legal for our committee to do this? Is it legal to do that? We are not going to be able to answer that for you, but we can tell you what has worked and not worked in practice. All right, so the first question is, do you need committees? Many HOAs don't have committees. Many only have one or two. Some have over a dozen. So, you start by saying, do you actually have to have the committee? Some are going to be required. If you look in your governing documents, many of you will find that an architectural committee is required to approve or deny modifications. And by state law, a grievance committee or a violation committee, a fine committee, a hearing committee, some version of that, whatever you call it, is required by state law if you are going to issue violations and then try to uphold fines. If you don't have that committee, you can't do that. So a couple of them are going to be required, and then other ones are going to be, at the pleasure of the board and at the appointment of the board, and sometimes it's even just at the pleasure or appointment of the president. Again, you have to look in your documents to see what do they say about how your HOA can form committees. Committees can be a huge benefit to the community. They should work at the pleasure of the board. They should support the board's goals, and we'll talk about how to do that. They can increase engagement in the community and bring outside expertise to a particular topic. Maybe someone doesn't want to serve on the board, but they're a landscape expert, or they're a GC or something, and can really help on the architectural committee or the landscape committee. So they can really benefit the community. However, as Alexis and I will get into some anecdotes, committees can become a liability. They can actually hinder the community. They can become a legal liability for the community if they're acting outside their scope or acting in contrary to your documents or state law. And we also do see some overreach and at times conflict. And so you have to be careful, but you have to make sure your committees are actually helping and benefiting the community. So Alexis, do you want to talk about what some of the most common committees you see in HOA world are? What they
Absolutely.
do?
Absolutely. So this is a list of what I feel are the most common committees, though every community is going to be different. They're going to vary. And the functionality of each of these committees is going to vary based on your specific property. So in a community that is also a country club community, maybe you don't have an activities committee, or maybe it's not as active as it would be in a community where you have a clubhouse and a person that is responsible for holding activities for the community. If you have no security gate or no heavy security systems, then you maybe don't have a very functioning security committee, if at all. But otherwise, for large HOA communities that have multiple gates, advanced security systems, this is probably one of the most important committees that they have, who has the most power. The same can be said for a finance committee. If you have a large budget, then maybe you have a very active finance committee that's responsible for project planning, budgeting, projecting out, or if you have a smaller budget, then maybe you don't have a finance committee at all. Again, it's going to vary. Obviously, if you're going to fine at any level, then you must have a hearing or grievance committee. The way those function are most likely dictated by Florida statutes, but some governing documents can have a say as well. And then landscape's also going to vary based on the size of your property. If you have common property, if you're responsible for individual homeowners' lots. So everything is dependent on your community specifically. So there's not a one size fits all.
For sure. What we don't want you to do today is just go out and start creating committees because
Yes.
you saw this list. You should,
Right.
again, make sure the committees are proper for your community, make sure they're serving a purpose, and make sure that they're benefiting the community. Don't just have committees to have them, because it can add a huge burden on your management office, on your property manager, because everyone, once they're on a committee, wants something either from the board or from management, and you can create a lot of inefficiency.
Definitely.
So Alexis, how can HOA committees be helpful? When does it make sense to have them?
So it makes sense when they are supporting the community and board, that it distributes the workload. So a board is made up of a certain number of members, and they can't all focus on all the things that an HOA needs to accomplish all the time. So a committee allows board members to delegate tasks. It reduces burnout. It enables more focused decision making at the board level, because committees are going to do the legwork and make the recommendations to the board, so that they're able to make decisions more rapidly. You get to tap into the expertise of your homeowners, people that have professional skills, personal experiences that can benefit the association, which also encourages community engagement. Making the community feel like they're part of the decision making or part of the projects is always good, because you want the committees and the boards to serve the community and vice versa. They address specialized issues. Back to the fact that they are doing all the legwork. They have the ability to focus on a certain set of items or information or an area, and that's all they have to worry about. So they're often more productive. They get to drill down more into the detail. They get to do more research, and then the community and the board benefits from all of that work. And it improves responsiveness by the board, because if the committees are functioning properly and doing everything that they should do to support the board and the community, then the board can accomplish things faster, because they have all the information and the research at their fingertips to do what they need to do. And it also supports in larger communities or with larger scale projects, future planning, because again, they can solely focus on that. They're not necessarily worried about the day-to-day operation. If you have a committee that's developed just for long-term planning, that's what they get to focus on. And it really enhances your long-term health of the community.
For sure. So there are also instances when committees may not be helpful. What do we see at times? So the first thing is a lack of oversight. So if the board hasn't given the committee clear direction, and if a board member isn't sitting on that committee, and yes, we recommend that a board member, at least one, if not maybe two in some instances, be a liaison and sit and even chair the committee. Because what you don't want is the committee just decide they're going to do what they want. If it's not part of the board's goals, you're just adding confusion, you're adding additional work to the management staff, and ultimately their work product is not going to be accepted by the board. So why are you spinning your wheels? And that comes from a lack of oversight and direction. That also leads into power struggles and overreach. So when a committee feels like they have a lot of autonomy, then they run off on their own and start trying to do things. They can become, something of like a shadow board, or they feel like they're the check and balance on the board's power. And again, the committee is appointed by the board to serve at the pleasure of the board to further the board's goals and objectives. We see this a lot with finance committees, to be completely honest. They feel like, he who controls the purse controls the power, or some version of that expression we've probably all heard. And they feel, the board feels like they can't spend money without running it through the finance committee. That is not true. I mean, the board is ultimately the one who decides how the association's money gets spent. You do not have to cede that control to a finance committee as a board, but we do see some communities that do it. Oops, sorry. Personal, unclear roles and responsibilities, that gets back into oversight and objectives. Again, you have to have to understand what this committee is supposed to be doing. Personal agendas or biases, we all have seen that in play, can create major personality conflicts that can disrupt what the board is trying to do. And then poor communication. The committee might be doing a great job, but if they're not reporting back to the board has no idea, and it gets very frustrating. The alternative is when the committee has, maybe we call it like a ta-da moment. The committee spent 6 months working on something, never checked in with the board. They didn't have a board liaison, and they show up and they think they have this thing completely gift wrapped for the board. It's ready to go. They want the board to vote on it, and the board says, well, this is nothing like what we expected. This is not what we were hoping for. This is way too much money. It's just not what we want. The committee is frustrated because they invested 6 months of their time, and had they checked in with the board, more frequently along the way, the board could have redirected them, or if they had a board liaison, they could have been redirected to, change their course a little bit. And now it's 6 months later, nothing's getting done. Nothing's going to get done because the board doesn't like the project, and they feel frustrated, and maybe they quit. And now you don't have a committee. So frequent communication between the committees and the board to understand what they're working on is critically important. So, yeah. So let's talk about establishing committees. So when you do want to have a committee and you do want it to be effective, how do you do it, Alexis?
So I think the first piece is you want to define a clear purpose. You want to establish specific goals or scope for the committee, whether it's something like architectural review and having a manual or set application that guides the committee, events, landscaping, all of those items requiring rules and regulations that guide them. You want to make sure that the committee's purpose aligns with the HOA's governing documents and the board's priorities, as well as the community's, because it should serve the community. And the best way to do that is to adopt a formal charter. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but the charter should be approved by the board, outlining objectives, responsibilities, any authority limits, whether the committee is purely advisory, if they have any decision-making, reporting requirements, back to what Evan was saying about a committee that worked for 6 months on something that the board was not aligned with. And then term lengths and membership rules, which I think is really important, which leads into establishing an annual recruitment and sign-up process. So you should always advertise when committee sign-up is going to open ahead of time so that the community is aware. You should create an application process or a methodology of collecting resumes so that you're treating people equally and everyone has a fair shot at it. And then you should also clearly identify when committees are going to be set so people understand when they'll be notified, and then developing a notification system, whether it's a template for an email or a letter or a phone call, alerting people that they've either been selected, not selected, whatever the case may be. You want to choose the right members, back to tapping into the homeownership and their relevant skills, their experiences. You want to seek diverse perspectives, ideally, although you want them to still be aligned with board goals. You want to encourage homeowners to participate, because when homeowners participate and they feel like they've affected change or improvement in their community, then they're more invested. You want to avoid conflicts of interest, personal agendas, of course. And then while we do want board member participation in committees, and they should serve as committee chairperson, you want to avoid oversaturation of board members on committees, because you don't want them to end up being little mini board meetings. You want to provide clear direction and oversight. The board should check in. The committee should have either reporting requirements to the board, or they should liaise often. Except for hearing, of course, grievance, because you can't be related to the board and there's really no check-in there. Minutes should be taken, and there should be boundaries, right? The committee should operate within the governing documents, that they should be advised that they're advisory bodies, that they don't have decision-making capabilities, and everyone should be on the same page. And then you should also provide your committee members with the resources they need to do their job the best they can, whether it's budgets, information, copies of architectural manuals, applications, governing documents, rules, right? Anything that will help them be the best committee member possible and provide continuity for that committee if they're joining and they're new. And then make sure you check in regularly with your committees. Are they fulfilling their charges? Are they performing the way they should perform, and adjust accordingly?
Right. So how do we keep the committees organized? How inside their committee meetings, what are the best practices?
So you should always post notice of meetings. Your community should know when you're holding meetings. Agenda items really should be posted. It also should align with any Florida statutes, local laws, your governing documents. It's going to depend what's on the agenda. If a decision is being made, it has different notice requirements, etc. Ensure that your committee meetings are open when required, but also it's good practice for the community to understand what committees are working on. You want to hold organized meetings. So you should stick to the agenda. You should stay focused on the committee scope. It's always good to schedule reoccurring meetings so the community is aware when a committee meets. So if your hearing committee meets the first Tuesday of every month, then they know that. If your, architectural review committee meets the second Wednesday of every month, these reoccurring or regularly scheduled meetings help keep the community aware of what's going on. And then, like Evan said, you want to designate a chairperson, usually a board member, to run the meeting so that it's consistent and organized. You want to maintain minutes, just any decisions that the board made or the committee, or recommendations that they're going to make to the board should be memorialized. Communicate with the board regularly. It helps maintain transparency. And then, of course, like in regular operation, just follow any rules, regulations, and be respectful of the community. When they attend open meetings, make sure you keep that dialogue open because that's who you are there serving.
So sometimes committees do devolve into conflict and it needs to be dealt with. I've already seen a few of the questions are dealing with HOA conflict. So what are some ways, Alexis, that you feel like the committees can either avoid conflict or if they get into it, they can deal with it?
Well, setting clear expectations is, I think, foremost. You have to know what the committee is charged with doing and make sure that they're operating within those expectations. I think respectful communication amongst committee members and with board members and community members. Anyone that's going to show up to a committee meeting, they should be treated with respect on both sides. It's never good to show up to a meeting and have things escalate to an uncomfortable level. So you want to promote a culture of active listening and allow for people to speak, give them the opportunity. If you think you're going to have a contentious meeting because there's something on the agenda that is, not received well by certain people, then maybe you set the ground rules ahead of time. You say, this is how we're going to go through it. And so you don't have people talking out of turn. And I think it will limit people's aggravation with each other. And then, of course, you want to address any issues promptly. So don't let something linger, don't let it fester. If it needs to be handled offline or individually with a committee member or a community member that consistently shows up to a committee meeting to cause conflict, then that's what you have to do. It's better to do it in private. Don't make a scene out of it. You can always involve the board. If there is a committee member that is not performing properly or fulfilling their duties or causing conflicts, then that should be evaluated. The same goes for a committee as a whole. If the committee is not fulfilling its obligation and it's really just creating conflict within the community and the board's not happy with it, and the community is not happy with it, then the board needs to evaluate that and take necessary steps. You can rotate leadership.
Right. Getting back into clear expectations. So setting up a charter and saying what the committee should do is very helpful. What I've also seen some very successful communities do is they literally put in the charter what the committee is not to do. For example, the finance committee is not going to review every invoice. The finance committee is not going to approve or disapprove contracts, perhaps. Doesn't mean that they can't, but these are certain things you may want to put in to make sure that people don't start to overstep. In some situations, you may say that the committee is not to interact directly with vendors. We see some committee members all of a sudden act as though they are the board or management, and they either make demands or in some cases, unfortunately, ask for favors of vendors and things. And this can really get you into hot water. So make sure the committees know where their responsibility ends very clearly, because I'll say, creep of their responsibilities is very real, and over time they try to accumulate more and more power, and sometimes to the detriment of the community and the board. So, and don't be afraid to restructure or disband is a very real thing. The board should never be afraid of their committees. If you're afraid of your committee, there's a problem, and you need to look at why is that, and take some action. I mean, disbanding the committee, removing the committee chair, these are all very real and appropriate actions the board should be taking if you ever find you're fearful of your committees or committee members. So what do we do when, I kind of got into it already, but what happens when the committee no longer serves its purpose?
So you should first start by checking your governing documents. As we stated earlier, you may have committees that are required. So obviously you can't get rid of a committee that you're required to have. So you should always check your documents. And it may require a board vote officially. So again, check your documents. You want to evaluate the reason for the dissolution. Is it because the committee has fulfilled its purpose? It's not always negative, right? It's not always about that they're not functioning or they're contentious or it's full of conflict. Sometimes a committee is created to fulfill a specific purpose, a gatehouse renovation, a road project, a document update review. And when that project is come to its completion, the committee doesn't need to exist anymore. So it's not always for bad purposes, but evaluate the reason for getting rid of that committee. Document the rationale for it. Obviously, transparency and record keeping is very important. And then notify the committee members. Hopefully, they're not shocked or taken by surprise, but you should definitely let them know if you're planning on disassembling the committee. And then you're going to have to take formal board action. You should memorialize it at a board meeting that's noticed and it's on the agenda where it's taken in the minutes. And then take the formal action at a board meeting. Make sure that you make the appropriate motion, and then I think it's really important to inform the community. Not every community member attends every board meeting. They don't watch the recordings. They don't request the minutes. So for full transparency, it is always best to maybe put a little blurb in a newsletter that goes out monthly or weekly, or if you want to send an email, if you're removing a committee that's existed for a long time. I think it just takes the surprise out of it when committee sign up comes around next year and people are shocked to see that a committee doesn't exist anymore. And best practices, keep records of your decisions, recognize volunteers. Again, if the committee if you're breaking the committee apart because it fulfilled its purpose and it did an excellent job at renovating that guardhouse or upgrading the security systems or, redoing all the landscaping at the main entrance, then you should recognize the efforts of those committee members because it's not always bad. And you should consider that you shouldn't let committees linger, meaning that if they're not fulfilling their purpose, you shouldn't just let them sit there, and you should take action that's necessary.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexis. So we'll get into the questions here. Again, just at a high level, never have committees just to have them. If you have them, make sure they serve a purpose, understand what that is, and document their purpose. Don't leave this call today thinking you should have more committees. I want you to leave this call today thinking you should have appropriate committees that are helping the board achieve its goals. So we have a few questions in the Q&A. Raymond asks, we want to keep our committees relatively small. 5 would be an ideal number. Some committees are oversubscribed. How do we determine who is on the committee, and how do you let the people who aren't going to make the cut, how do you let them down easy? So I think you talked a little bit about some of that stuff. Alexis, do you want to kind of answer that again?
I think setting up protocols for selecting your committee members is a really great practice. So you open it at the same time for the whole community, you close it at the same time, and then whether it's the board, the president, the chair, however your community functions, or maybe you need to establish how your community functions, having them review those applications and resumes and just determine how many people are on the committee. Most of the time, with the exception of some required committees, your documents aren't going to talk about the size of the committee. So it's really up to your chairs, your boards, your presidents to determine what's best for the community. I think consistency is best. If you set a precedent, it is hard to unroll it, but you should do what's best for your community. If you need to start limiting, then rolling out a process of selection kind of gives you a refresh, and you're able to start fresh, select the number, let everyone down easily. A template email is a great way to let people know you were selected, you weren't selected, and people might be upset, but you can't let everyone on all the time. So.
So Debbie asked, what happens if your entire HOA committee volunteers throw in the towel and no longer wish to be part of it, and no one is left? Well, I guess it depends. What was the committee doing, and were they serving their purpose or not? Sometimes that's a blessing. Sometimes they throw in the towel because they couldn't do what they wanted. They were being forced to do what the board wanted. But at the same time, if this is a mandated committee, perhaps it's architectural or hearing or grievance, and you need people to serve, then you have to find out the why. I mean, they left for a reason. Is it because the meetings were too inconsistent? Was it because the meetings were too long? Was it because they didn't like the direction the community was headed? I mean, when people quit in mass, there's generally a reason, and trying to get to the bottom of that will help, keep them involved. And I would always talk to the people. Every community has, I would say, a consistent group of people who come to the board meetings. It may not be many, maybe it's 5, 10, 12. But those people are all interested in the community. If they weren't, they wouldn't be at those board meetings. So try to recruit from your board meeting regulars. You'll often find there's people who are willing to help the community there. Rhonda asks, how can we have committees shorten their meetings? We have one that's 3 hours or more. You have any ideas there, Alexis?
No, people like to talk. They like to hear themselves talk. I was staying on agenda items and making sure that you go in with an organized agenda backup board, the packet that the committee is going to review. But honestly, sometimes it's just difficult because people just talk a lot, and I wish there was a simple solution. I've certainly been in my fair share of committee meetings that have lasted way longer than necessary. But keeping on task and keeping the committee to the agenda is my best advice.
Yeah, I mean, this goes for board meetings, this goes for committee meetings. You have to set the agenda in advance. You need to stick to the agenda. And some communities will appoint, make sure it's the chairperson's job to keep everyone on task. And it's not rude to interrupt. If we're talking about the main entrance and all of a sudden we start talking about the roving security guard, someone's got to say, hey, Mr. Smith, we're just not here to talk about security today. And that can go a long way. I would say whoever is chairing that meeting needs to have some more responsibility, or maybe you need to find a new chair. Unless there's just that much business. If you have 200 violations to hear, maybe it does take 3 hours. I mean, that could be realistic, but I often find it's just going off agenda. Committee size is another one. If everyone gets to talk for 5 minutes and your committee's 9, that's 45 minutes. If it's only 5, that's 25 minutes. You can cut the meeting in half if you cut the number of participants in half. So think through your committee size as well. Jody says, in our HOA, the board decides the committee chair, the chairs decide their friends are in, you're out. What's the best way to fill committees? I think we talked about that some, but I think the board should be picking their committee members. And as Alexis has mentioned a couple times now, an application process, listing your qualifications can go a long way. There's nothing that says that the committee chair has to appoint the committee. In fact, if you look at your documents, you might find that the board has to appoint all committee members. So I encourage you to look at your documents there. It was stated that HOA assesses a fine and hearings or grievance committee is required. What if we impose late payment fees? I think what you're asking, David, is late fees on maintenance. If that's the case, that's not a violation. That's being delinquent in a monetary obligation, and your documents probably have a separate provision for late fees or interest. But again, we're not lawyers today, so if you have a question about that, I would encourage you to talk to your legal counsel. Let's see. So Raymond brings up, should members of a committee sign a pledge that they have no self-interest and can recuse themselves? I think more like a code of ethics. Alexis, have you seen something like that, and has it been effective?
I have, and it has been effective. I've seen board members sign like a code of conduct or a pledge of, good ethics, morals, and then committee members as well. Just make sure that it pertains to your committee members and their functionality. I've also seen it where, a community uses the same pledge for board members and committee members. And a lot of times the responsibilities actually don't overlap as much as you might think that they would. So just make sure that it's particular to the function that that committee member is serving as far as like the day-to-day operation of the committee as versus the board, which represents the association on a larger scale.
Right. Are agendas and minutes required? Did we get an answer?
Yes, though we're not attorneys and this is not legal advice, you should check with your association attorney. Typically, committees are required to be noticed if a committee is making a financial decision. So for some reason, a committee is not making an advisory decision, but an actual final decision on spending money, then you are required to notice it and it's required to be open to the community, as well as architectural review committees are required to be posted per the attorney that we spoke to. But again, check with your own attorney, check your documents, not legal advice.
Right. Let's see here. What are your thoughts of having a covenant enforcement committee, or I guess you're talking about like a violation committee that does work that's overwhelming a manager? That's a tricky one. I'll be honest, I've seen it work both ways. I've seen violation committees that can be helpful because if you have a really extensive community, there's some communities out there that are 1,500, 2,000 homes, and they want more enforcement than a 40-hour manager, even a 40-hour violations coordinator could possibly provide. Sometimes they want after-hours enforcement, weekend enforcement, and there can be a benefit to having a small committee fill that gap, but it comes with significant risks. I want to be clear about this because I've seen the people on the violations committee selectively enforce. I've seen them not enforce against their friends and double enforce against their enemies. They're not nearly as impartial a group as a property manager who doesn't live in the community might be. So be very, very careful about how that committee is acting, because that committee could certainly put you in legal jeopardy if they are not following the statutes, and particularly if they're selectively enforcing. So my advice is generally against it, unless you have some unique issues that where it's filling in a gap. But let's see. Is there any value or benefit to establishing an ad hoc committee versus a formal committee? So I think what that really means is, an ad hoc committee is kind of for a one-off. I consider that for like a one-off project. For example, a lot of communities, when they're looking at redoing their cable or internet agreement, comes up once every 10 years. You don't need a standing cable and internet committee. But for a 6 to 18 month period, you may and probably should have one. So yes, I think when you have a one-off project, having an ad hoc committee for that project can be very helpful with the understanding they're disbanded. And that helps the committee members know that there is a timeline that they're not going to be serving indefinitely. Your standing committees, again, are for things like architectural, grievance and fining, things that are just going to continue in perpetuity, perhaps landscaping, security, as we talked about earlier. Let's see. All right. I think that's about it. There's some statements on here. But in general, I think that's about it as far as the questions that we can cover today, from a timing and from a kind of legal versus best practices standpoint. So we do appreciate everybody being on. It's greatly helpful to us if you could fill out the poll. It's what helps us do additional webinars in the future and make them better for all of you. If you would like to attend future courses with Campbell, strongly encourage you to go to campbellevents.org. That's Campbell, CAMPBELL, events.org. That's where you can find information on future courses and get also updates from our newsletter and weekly blog posts. So that's it for me. Alexis, any parting words before we go today?
Nope, I think we covered it all. All the words have been said.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. We really do appreciate it. The poll The open-ended feedback is extremely helpful, and look for more HOA-centric webinars in the future. We are making that a focus here in 2025. The condos have gotten a lot of everyone's time due to the addition of all the new legislation. So we're trying to focus on you guys in HOA land as much as we can. So have a great rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for watching. For more great educational content, click the subscribe button now.